There's a very popular idea that seems beautiful, but can be extremely dangerous. They say that when something good happens in your life, you should share it with everyone. Show off your progress, talk about your plans, celebrate your achievements publicly. It seems positive, almost a social rule. But when you observe human behavior closely, the same way Machiavelli observed kings, leaders, and empires, you notice something uncomfortable. The world doesn't react to success the way people imagine. Often, the moment someone starts talking too much about their achievements, something silent happens around them. People begin to reassess their positions. Some start observing more closely, others start competing, and some start silently hoping it doesn't last. Machiavelli understood something few people like to admit. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that visible success alters social dynamics. When someone reveals progress before consolidating it, they create something extremely delicate, strategic vulnerability. Not because people are necessarily bad, but because human nature reacts to changes in position within the group. One person's gain can be perceived as a threat by another, and that is precisely why many of the most powerful men in history learned to master an extremely rare skill: strategic silence. They built first, and only then let the world see it. In this video, you'll understand something that almost no one explains clearly. There's an invisible mechanism that begins to operate the moment someone announces success too early. Silent envy, social recalibration, dangerous expectations, enemies that emerge where before there were only friendly conversations. And when you understand this dynamic deeply, you realize why some men manage to build lasting power, while others attract resistance precisely when they begin to grow. Because sometimes a man's biggest mistake isn't failing, it's talking about success before it's time. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder you are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. There's a silent mistake many people make when they start making progress in life. It's almost instinctive, the urge to tell friends, family, colleagues, sometimes even people who weren't even there on the journey. It seems innocent, almost natural. After all, who doesn't like to share a victory? But when someone observes reality with a bit more detachment, just as Machiavelli did when studying human nature, they begin to notice something curious. The premature announcement of success creates immediate vulnerability. The moment someone reveals plans, gains, or advancements before they are consolidated, they give away something extremely valuable: predictability. And when predictability comes into play, the power dynamic changes completely. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the world rarely rewards strategic naivete. Often, silence protects more than any speech. A man who learns this early understands that not every achievement needs an audience. In fact, many of history's greatest victories happened in absolute silence. Now consider something simple from everyday life. Imagine someone who starts building a promising business and decides to tell everyone even before structuring the project. At first, there are compliments, encouragement, positive comments. But soon after, the questions begin, then the doubts, then the comparisons. Suddenly, that same achievement that seemed like a reason for celebration becomes a source of pressure. It is at this moment that many people realize something that Machiavelli had already understood centuries ago. When you expose your moves too early, you allow others to recalibrate their strategies in relation to you. Some begin to compete silently, others begin to observe your failures, some even hope that it doesn't work out, even if they never admit it. It's not pure malice. Often it's simply real human nature. That's why strategic leaders have always applied a silent principle. Decisions based on real human nature, not on idealistic expectations. A solid project is rarely born in public display. It grows first in the shadows. There is also a little discussed psychological factor. When someone announces success before consolidating it, they create an invisible weight upon themselves. Now, there is not only the work to be done, there is also the expectation of others. And expectation is a powerful force, sometimes heavier than the challenge itself. The individual begins to act to maintain an image, not to build something real. And this is the beginning of many silent failures. Machiavelli spoke about the importance of the appearance of virtue, but he also understood that appearance without structure is fragile. True virtue is not in talking about what you are building, but in building something so solid that the world only discovers it when it is too late to stop it. The calculated use of force often begins with something seemingly simple, knowing when to speak, and especially when not to speak, because when someone learns to manage information, they begin to understand a much deeper game, a game where virtù and fortuna meet. And it is precisely at this point that an even more uncomfortable question arises, because sometimes the problem isn't success itself. It's in the way the people around him react when he shows up. There's an aspect of human nature that's rarely discussed openly, but which profoundly influences how people react to the success of others. When someone nearby begins to prosper, a part of the human brain interprets it not as an isolated achievement, but as a redistribution of position within the group. This is what many psychologists call zero-sum perception. If someone rises, someone else has to fall. Now observe something curious. Most people would never say this aloud. On the contrary, many will continue smiling, praising, and offering supportive words, but internally something begins to change. It is at this point that the cold reading of human nature, something Machiavelli analyzed with enormous precision, becomes valuable. He understood that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires recognizing that emotions such as envy, comparison, and resentment have always been part of human behavior. That's why strategic leaders have always been cautious about revealing achievements before the right moment. Not because they feared criticism, but because they understood the invisible mechanics of social reaction. Think of something simple and extremely common. A professional who works quietly for years improves their skills, learns about investments, creates new sources of income, and begins to prosper. Initially, no one pays much attention, but the moment they reveal a visible change, a new car, a new business, an important promotion, something curious happens in the surrounding environment. People who were previously neutral begin to recalculate their social standing. Some start asking questions with a different tone, others begin to compare their own trajectories, and a few, silently, begin to wish that this progress wouldn't last long. Not because they are bad people, but because the human brain is extremely sensitive to social hierarchy. This is precisely why constant adaptability becomes a strategic skill. Those who understand this phenomenon don't interpret these reactions as personal attacks. They simply understand that decisions based on real human nature require managing information carefully. Not everything needs to be announced the moment it happens. And here comes one of the most practical lessons one can apply in real life. When an achievement arises, be it a new investment, a professional promotion, or a promising project, The smartest move is often simply to continue working quietly. Experienced investors do this all the time. Strategic entrepreneurs do too. They understand that true power is rarely in display, but in consolidation. That's why many leaders apply something very close to the Machiavellian principle of avoiding being hated while quietly building strength. They maintain an appearance of normalcy, remain discreet, and let the results mature before becoming visible. It's a silent form of calculated use of force, not wasting energy on social approval while the structure is still being built. Because when one learns to observe these dynamics clearly, one perceives something even more interesting. Some of the greatest power centers in history understood this long before any modern strategy manual. And one of the most fascinating examples of this comes directly from the Renaissance, when an entire family managed to control the European financial system practically as if it were a ghost. When one begins to study the history of real power, not the romanticized version found in textbooks, but the stark reality observed by strategists like Machiavelli, one name repeatedly emerges as a fascinating case: the Medici family. During the Renaissance, while kings ruled territories and armies marched across Europe's borders, there was a family in Florence wielding immense influence, almost always silently. The Medici were not kings in the traditional sense. They didn't wear golden crowns or proclaim absolute authority before the masses. On the contrary, they often appeared merely as highly competent bankers. But behind this unassuming facade lay something far more powerful: financial control, networks of influence, and decisions grounded in genuine human nature. They deeply understood a principle that any modern strategist should study: those who control the invisible flows rarely need to appear on stage. It was politics guided by reality, not ideals, applied with surgical precision. Now consider something even more interesting. The Medici family mastered what we now call strategic information management, while other families openly competed for political power, displaying wealth and status to the entire city. The Medici preferred something different, operating as an almost ghostly presence. Their banking networks financed kings, popes, and entire governments, but often the public didn't even perceive the extent of this power. This was no coincidence. It was strategy. The appearance of virtue and moderation protected their position, while the true power structure consolidated behind the scenes. In other words, they understood something that remains valid centuries later: the calculated use of force rarely requires noise. In fact, the greater the power, the greater the silence that usually accompanies it. This is precisely why Machiavelli spoke of virtù and fortuna as forces that need to walk hand in hand. Fortuna creates opportunities, but virtù determines who knows how to seize them without drawing attention too early. There is an extremely practical application of this logic in modern life. Think of the world's most successful investors. Many of them spend years quietly accumulating positions before the market notices the move. Think of strategic entrepreneurs who work for years on projects before making them public. Even in the corporate world, this happens all the time. Truly strategic leaders build their own loyal armies, trusted teams, solid networks, accumulated knowledge, long before any official announcement of expansion or growth. Because those who understand the true nature of power know that early visibility can attract opposing forces before the structure is ready to support them. That's why constant adaptability and accurate reading of the environment become essential skills. And when someone starts to observe these patterns carefully, they realize that there is an almost mathematical rule behind it all. A simple rule, but extremely powerful. The one who reveals less and knows more usually wins. There's an unspoken rule governing almost every power game, whether in the business world, politics, or even personal relationships. This rule is known as information asymmetry. Simply put, it means that whoever knows more and reveals less almost always has a strategic advantage. It seems obvious when you first hear it, but few people actually apply it in their daily lives. Many continue to reveal their plans, ambitions, and even future moves with astonishing ease. And it is precisely at this point that Machiavelli's realistic vision makes sense again. He understood that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires something many people find uncomfortable: carefully managing what you reveal to the world, because information, when poorly distributed, ceases to be knowledge and becomes vulnerability. Now consider something extremely practical. Imagine two entrepreneurs starting projects in the same market. The first shares every step on social media: new ideas, new strategies, growth targets, all announced with enthusiasm. The second works quietly, tests hypotheses, builds strategic relationships, and observes the environment before acting. Months later, when the first is still trying to validate their ideas, the second already has partnerships, suppliers, and a consolidated structure. This happens because the second applied something very close to what Machiavelli would call decisions based on real human nature. They understood that information is a form of power, and power, when well managed, rarely needs to be displayed. This principle appears in various fields of life. Silent investors, for example, spend months studying an asset before making any visible move. Market analysts do the same. Even military strategists have always understood that revealing the plan before execution is practically an invitation to failure. There's also a very interesting psychological detail in this dynamic. When someone talks too much about their plans, it creates an artificial sense of progress. It's almost as if the brain receives an early reward simply for verbalizing the intention. But those who understand the logic of virtu and fortuna know that intention doesn't build power. Execution does. And execution requires something few people master: disciplined silence. This silence doesn't mean hiding out of fear, but rather applying a calculated use of force. The person observes more than they speak, learns more than they announce, builds more than they promise. And over time, something curious happens. While others continue discussing possibilities, they are already consolidating results. That's why ancient strategists always repeated a simple maxim: whoever controls the information controls the pace of the game. And when someone begins to understand this deeply, they realize that there is an extremely delicate moment in any journey of growth. A time when exposure can be costly, a brief window of time, where enemies begin to appear. There is an extremely delicate moment in the trajectory of anyone who begins to prosper. It's a small interval, often invisible to those experiencing the situation, but extremely evident to those observing with a strategic eye. This moment can be called the window of exposure. It's the period between announcing something and actually consolidating it. It seems like an insignificant detail, but in practice, this interval is usually where the biggest problems arise. Machiavelli, who always analyzed politics guided by reality, not ideals, perfectly understood this phenomenon. For him, the real danger rarely lay in success itself, but in the moment when that success became visible before it was protected. When someone announces an advance too early, they are not just sharing an achievement, they are signaling a strategic move. And when strategic moves become visible, other people immediately begin to recalculate their own positions. Consider something very common in the business world. An entrepreneur announces that they are expanding their company, opening new branches, or entering a new market. The announcement generates initial enthusiasm, but it also produces something that often goes unnoticed: competitive attention. Other entrepreneurs begin to observe that movement. Some accelerate their own projects. Others try to occupy the same space first. In more extreme cases, criticism, rumors, or discreet attempts to weaken the initiative arise. Not because there is necessarily a conspiracy against that person, but because decisions based on real human nature show that the competitive environment reacts whenever an opportunity becomes visible. This is precisely why strategic leaders prefer to consolidate first and announce later. It's the same principle that investors use when accumulating assets quietly before any public disclosure. They know that the shorter the window between announcement and consolidation, the lower the risk of external interference. Now imagine this on an even more personal scale. A professional decides to change careers, start a new project, or even begin a more aggressive investment plan. If they announce everything at the beginning, before the structure is ready, they open the door to unsolicited comments, advice, and even doubts that can weaken their own conviction. Often, these interferences come from well-intentioned people who don't understand the strategy behind the move. This is why ancient strategists always talked about the importance of building your own loyal armies before making any advance visible. This can mean reliable partners, experienced mentors, or simply a solid knowledge base. It is the combination of virtu and fortuna that protects a project during its most vulnerable phase. And when someone begins to understand this logic, they realize something even more uncomfortable. Because often the first obstacles don't come from declared enemies. They emerge from people who were smiling beside you until yesterday. There's a type of challenge few expect to encounter when they begin to prosper. It's not an outright enemy, not someone who openly opposes you. In fact, it's often the exact opposite. These are people who have been around for years, who converse normally, who smiled at meetings, at gatherings, in everyday conversations. But the moment your position begins to shift, something curious happens within them. The way they observe you changes. And here comes one of Machiavelli's most realistic observations about human relations. Many alliances exist as long as interests remain aligned. When positions change, calculations also change. This doesn't necessarily mean outright betrayal. Sometimes it's just a silent adjustment of behavior, but those who observe carefully notice quickly. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands recognizing that social friendships and strategic alliances are different things. Imagine a very common situation. A group of friends who grew up together, worked together, or studied together for years. They all share a similar reality, similar difficulties, similar dreams. But over time, one of them begins to advance faster. He invests more in knowledge, learns new skills, builds new projects. Gradually, his trajectory begins to diverge from the group. At first, no one notices much difference. But as the results appear, small changes begin. Ironic comments, jokes with a different tone, criticism disguised as advice. Sometimes seemingly innocent questions arise, such as, "Do you think this will last?" Or, "Isn't it going too fast?" Those who observe real human nature realize that these reactions are not entirely conscious. Often they stem from something very simple: social recalibration. When someone changes position, the people around them automatically try to understand what that means for their own position. That's why strategists throughout history have always valued something fundamental: their own loyal armies. Not necessarily armies in the military sense, of course, but circles of trust formed by people who share similar vision, discipline, and objectives. An experienced mentor, for example, can be far more valuable than dozens of superficial opinions. Books also fulfill this silent role. Works like Machiavelli's The Prince, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, or even Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money help develop a mindset less dependent on the immediate approval of the social environment. This type of preparation creates something extremely important: constant adaptability. Because those who understand the dynamics of power know that the appearance of social virtue often hides invisible calculations. And when someone begins to notice these subtle changes in behavior around them, they discover another curious detail. Often people don't need to see their assets to realize that something has changed. Just observe their behavior. There's a curious detail about prosperity that few people notice at first. Even before assets materialize, behavior begins to change, and the surrounding environment quickly perceives this. This change is what many strategists call behavioral signaling. It's not necessarily intentional. Most of the time, it happens almost imperceptibly. The person starts making different decisions, begins to value their time more, selects the environments they frequent more carefully, and even changes how they respond to others' expectations. And it is precisely at this moment that other people begin to notice that something is happening. Machiavelli deeply understood this phenomenon. For him, those who observe human nature attentively know that behavioral signals reveal power shifts long before the external structure becomes visible. That's why decisions based on real human nature always take into account something simple. Behavior is an extremely powerful silent language. Think of something very practical. A professional who begins to study finance, strategy, and personal development starts to see the world differently. They begin to say no more easily. They avoid unproductive environments. They exchange hours of distraction for hours of building something. Perhaps they start investing regularly, studying markets, or developing new skills. Gradually, their routine changes. And this change generates curiosity in their surroundings. Some people start asking what's happening, others just observe. And a few begin to interpret it as a sign of a change in position. This happens because behavior always communicates something. An individual who manages their time better, invests in knowledge, and becomes more disciplined inevitably transmits a silent message. They are preparing for something bigger. It is at this point that the appearance of virtue can be used with strategic intelligence. It's not about pretense, but about understanding that not every advancement needs to be explained in detail to the world. There is also an extremely interesting aspect to this process. When someone begins to develop virtù, that combination of discipline, strategic intelligence, and adaptability that Machiavelli valued, the environment itself begins to react. Some opportunities arise, some people approach, others distance themselves. It's almost as if reality is constantly testing the individual's level of preparedness. And here, a fundamental skill comes into play: constant adaptability. Those who learn to observe these signs understand that each change in behavior generates different responses around them. And managing these responses requires emotional maturity and a strategic reading of the environment. Because behavior reveals much more than visible assets. In fact, it often reveals something even deeper: how a person deals with growth. And this detail leads to an extremely interesting question, because curiously, many people manage to endure poverty with dignity, but they collapse when abundance appears. There's a silent test that almost no one mentions when talking about wealth, progress, or success. Many people believe that life's greatest challenge is enduring scarcity. But when someone observes reality with the strategic coldness that Machiavelli applied to studying human behavior, they realize something surprising. Scarcity often unites people, while abundance reveals who they truly are. This phenomenon can be called the prosperity test. During difficult times, there's a sense of equality among people. Everyone faces similar challenges, similar limitations, and similar expectations. But when someone begins to prosper, the environment changes. The social dynamic changes, and the individual themselves also begins to face new kinds of decisions. It is at this moment that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, becomes fundamental. Because prosperity without psychological preparation can be more dangerous than scarcity itself. Think about something that frequently happens in stories of rapid success. A person who has never managed large resources suddenly receives a lot of money, whether from a rapidly growing business, a booming investment, or even an unexpected prize. At first, everything seems incredible, but soon after, invisible pressures begin to emerge. Family expectations, new social circles, complex financial decisions, and even changes in one's own identity. Those who have never developed discipline and internal structure often get lost in this process. That's why strategists throughout history have always emphasized the importance of building virtù before fortuna. Fortune brings opportunity, but only virtù sustains growth. For example, many experienced investors recommend simple habits that seem almost banal, but make all the difference. Studying financial education before investing large sums, diversifying assets, and maintaining a solid reserve. Books like The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham or Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki help precisely with this, developing mindset before dealing with resources. There is also a hidden social test within prosperity. When someone begins to have more resources, new demands inevitably arise. People asking for help, unexpected invitations, dubious opportunities, seemingly irresistible proposals. And at that moment, one of life's greatest strategic challenges emerges, learning to balance generosity and protection. Machiavelli always warned about the importance of avoiding being hated, but he also understood that uncontrolled generosity creates political and social problems that are difficult to manage. Those who observe real human nature realize that helping people is noble, but helping without criteria can generate dependence, endless expectations, and even resentment in the future. That is precisely why strategic leaders learn to manage something extremely delicate, the way they demonstrate generosity, because there is a huge difference between helping in silence and to transform generosity into a public spectacle. There's an extremely delicate detail when someone begins to prosper, how they demonstrate generosity. In theory, helping others always seems positive, almost indisputable. But when we observe reality with the strategic eye that Machiavelli applied to studying human behavior, we realize that even generosity requires intelligence. This is because helping people involves not only good intentions, it also involves social expectations. When someone begins to help in a very visible way, especially in public, it creates a dynamic that is difficult to manage. Other people begin to expect the same treatment. Some begin to see it as an obligation. Others begin to measure who received more or less help. And curiously, something that began as a noble gesture can turn into an unexpected source of resentment. That's why strategists who understand politics as guided by reality, not ideals, have always carefully managed how they demonstrate generosity. Consider something very common in the modern world. A person begins to prosper and decides to help family or friends publicly, paying debts, offering money, or financing personal projects. Initially, the reaction is usually positive: gratitude, praise, recognition. But over time, something curious begins to happen. Other people appear with new demands. Some begin to interpret that help as a permanent pattern. Others begin to compare who received more or less attention. Suddenly, what should strengthen relationships begins to generate silent tension. Machiavelli understood this phenomenon very well when he spoke about the importance of avoiding being hated. He did not advocate the absence of generosity, but rather the calculated use of force in this area as well. Often, helping discreetly creates much healthier relationships than turning help into a spectacle. The appearance of public virtue may impress crowds, but silent generosity usually builds true respect. There are fascinating historical examples of this. Many leaders throughout history have preferred to support social, cultural, or religious projects without necessarily associating their name directly with the action. This type of behavior creates something very valuable: strategic freedom. Those who help silently do not create public dependence or permanent expectations. Furthermore, they preserve something that Machiavelli deeply valued: constant adaptability. When a person is not bound by the obligation to maintain a public image of generosity, they can decide when, how, and whom to help with much more wisdom. In practical life, this can mean something simple: discreetly supporting a friend in need, investing in someone's education without publicizing it, or contributing to relevant projects without turning it into self-promotion. Because when someone begins to deeply understand true human nature, they realize something even more important. Not all growth fails because of external enemies. Sometimes the very pace of growth, that's what ends up destroying everything. There's a silent trap that often appears just when everything seems to be going right: excessive acceleration. At the beginning of any journey, progress is usually slow. Small steps, small results, a lot of patience. But when the first signs of success appear, many people enter a state of productive euphoria. They want to do more, grow faster, expand everything at once. And it is at this point that one of the most common strategic errors in history begins. Machiavelli, observing politics guided by reality, not by ideals, understood that every system has limits to its sustainability. Growth is important, of course, but growing beyond the capacity of the structure can be fatal, because true power is not just conquering territory, it's being able to maintain it. And often the difference between a solid rise and a silent collapse lies precisely in the pace of decisions. Think about the business world for a moment. Many entrepreneurs start with a small operation, validate a product, build a customer base, and begin to grow. So far, so good. The problem arises when they try to multiply that growth too quickly. They open several branches at the same time, hire teams larger than they can manage, and take on debts that depend on continuous growth to be paid off. At first, it seems like expansion, but often it's just accumulating structural pressure. Business history is full of such examples: companies that grew too fast and collapsed because the internal structure couldn't keep pace with the ambition. That's why experienced strategists always apply something close to the Machiavellian principle of constant adaptability. Before expanding, they strengthen the base. Before taking new risks, they consolidate previous victories. It's exactly the logic of virtù and fortuna. Fortuna creates opportunities, but virtù determines whether someone has the capacity to sustain them. There is also a very powerful psychological aspect behind this acceleration. When someone begins to experience success, the brain receives an intense reward: recognition, social validation, a sense of progress. And this feeling can create an almost uncontrollable desire to repeat the same pattern faster and faster. This is where the true test of strategic maturity comes in. Those who understand decisions based on real human nature learn to observe their own emotions carefully. They notice when enthusiasm begins to outweigh discipline. And at that moment, they apply something that Machiavelli deeply valued: the calculated use of force. Not every opportunity needs to be seized immediately. Not all growth needs to be accelerated to the maximum. Sometimes the smartest move is to consolidate quietly. Because when someone learns to master the rhythm of their own expansion, they discover an enemy even more dangerous than any external competitor. An enemy that doesn't appear in the markets, not even in the strategies, but within one's own mind. There is an enemy that rarely appears in market analyses, financial reports, or business strategies. And, curiously, it is one of the things responsible for destroying more projects, more fortunes, and more careers than any external competitor. That enemy is the ego. When someone begins to grow, gain recognition, or achieve important positions, a powerful sense of self-confidence arises. Initially, this confidence is healthy. It drives decisions, strengthens leadership, and helps to face challenges. But when it is not managed with discipline, it can turn into something dangerous. Machiavelli observed this very clearly when studying rulers and political leaders. Many kings were not overthrown by stronger enemies. They were overthrown by their own impulsive decisions. That is why politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires an extremely rare skill, the ability to observe one's own mind with strategic coldness. Consider something that frequently happens in the world of business and investment. An entrepreneur makes a series of good decisions, builds a solid company, and begins to receive recognition. Gradually, that person begins to believe that their judgment is infallible. They start ignoring advice, dismissing dissenting opinions, and taking increasingly greater risks. At first, nothing seems wrong because their previous trajectory reinforces their sense of competence. But when reality changes, and it always does, ego prevents quick adjustments. This is where the lack of constant adaptability begins to take its toll. Great investors have always warned about this. Warren Buffett, for example, often says that the greatest risk in the market is not volatility. It's intellectual arrogance. Those who believe they have already understood everything about a game rarely realize when the rules begin to change. Machiavelli describes something very close to this when speaking about the importance of virtù. Virtù is not just courage or strategic intelligence. It is also self-control. It is knowing how to recognize limits, listen to advice, and maintain discipline even when success begins to generate applause. That's why many truly powerful leaders cultivate something that seems simple but is extremely difficult. Circles of trust formed by people who may disagree with them. They are true armies of their own, loyal followers, not in the sense of blind obedience, but of intellectual loyalty. People who warn when something starts to get out of control. In practice, this can mean having experienced mentors, trusted advisors, or even the habit of constantly studying to avoid the illusion of absolute mastery. Because those who observe real human nature perceive an uncomfortable truth. Many fortunes are not destroyed by external crises. They are destroyed when success makes someone believe that no longer needs to be learned. Now think honestly for a moment. How many times have you seen someone begin to prosper, and shortly after, a wave of criticism, doubt, or even silent sabotage arises around them? This happens all the time, not because success is something wrong, but because human nature reacts to changes in position within the group. When someone begins to rise, the environment automatically recalculates relationships, interests, and expectations. This is exactly what Machiavelli observed when studying rulers, leaders, and empires throughout history. The problem is rarely success itself. The problem lies in how that success is managed. Those who understand politics guided by reality, not by ideals, learn that lasting power requires something few people practice: strategic silence, emotional discipline, and an accurate reading of real human nature. Now, the most important question is for you. Have you been building your victories in silence, or have you been announcing each step before consolidating the ground? Have you been strengthening your virtù, developing discipline, strategy, and constant adaptability? Or have you been letting the excitement of the moment expose your moves too early? Great strategists have always known that fortune creates opportunities, but only virtù sustains achievements over time. And this applies to any area of life: career, business, investments, or personal development. Sometimes the smartest decision is not to speak louder, it's to work deeper. It's not to show progress, it's to consolidate it. Because those who learn to use silence as a strategy begin to realize something powerful. Many battles cease to exist simply because no one noticed you were preparing. And now I want to ask you a direct question. After everything you've heard here, do you think you've been talking too much about your plans? Or have you been building with strategic intelligence? I want to know your opinion. Write in the comments. Do you prefer to announce your achievements or build everything in silence? This conversation can open the minds of many people who haven't yet realized how human nature really works. And if you want to continue learning about strategy, human behavior, and the principles that thinkers like Machiavelli observed throughout history, then take advantage now. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. That way, you won't miss the next videos, where we'll explore ideas that can completely change the way you see power, influence, and personal growth. Because understanding human nature, it's one of the most valuable skills someone can develop in life.